Gary is an economist who currently works for the federal government as an advisor to Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Gary has previously worked for the World Bank and the OECD of Energy Economics. He has a master's degree from University of Cambridge and was a visiting fellow at the Oxford Institute of Energy Economics. Outside of his work, Gary is often found sailing. He's from White Rock, BC, and is the curator of TEDx White Rock this year. Let's welcome Gary.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for having me today, and special shout out to Daniel, who's hiding behind the screen and changing slides for me today. I gotta say, I've met Daniel at many gatherings with member of parliaments, with community leaders, and he's definitely stood out as someone who's extremely thoughtful and a great organizer. So I think Elcoy has someone great to be here. So today my slide is about sustainable jobs, which is the federal government's plan to transition the economy in terms of labor. And maybe just the next slide. Yeah, and the next slide. So I'm an economist by training, and if we think about the economics of climate change, I think economists often approach by three factors. So we have capital, land, and labor. And what they are is we think about all these factors coming together and producing something. So when we think of capital, these are things on climate financing, how do we create carbon pricing, how do we have feed-in tariffs for renewable energy, and generally speaking, incentives for investors. In terms of land, that is in terms of how do we manage our natural resources correctly. So forest management, critical minerals for clean transition, and project permitting to speed up our extraction of resources. And lastly, for labor, which is what I'm going to talk about today, is how do we build up skilled labor for the green transition and about doing good paying jobs. And so I wanted to start by positioning sustainable jobs as one of the many factors within the clean transition, but certainly labor is a very important aspect of what we're doing when we think about the transition. So next slide. Why is this important? I think there are four reasons why a sustainable jobs transition is very important. The first is that we have the economic argument in terms of jobs that create clean growth for the economy. It increases employment, which is very important. If you look at what the International Energy Agency, the IEA, is saying, is that every year from now until 2030, we're looking at about $4.5 trillion a year for the energy transition. Does anyone know what the GDP of Canada is per year? Anyone want to venture a guess? Yes, sir. It is less than that. How much less? Can you give?
1 trillion?
Yeah, very close. So if you take the latest figure in US dollars, it's about $2 trillion a year. And what that means is that you have an opportunity that every year is twice more than what the entire economy of Canada is. And 4.5 trillion is very close to the entire economy of France as well. And then that creates a lot of really good economic opportunities. And next slide, please. I wanted to show this graph, and it's a little bit complicated, but in Canada right now, we have a lot of discussion about productivity. So this is a graph that shows the G7 countries. So that's a club of the 7 richest countries in the Western world in terms of their productivity growth since 1950s to about the 2010s. And Canada is the purple line, which is right at the bottom. And what you can see is that since the 1950s, Canada has enjoyed very sustained growth in terms of our productivity, about 2% a year. But certainly it's going down. If you look at in the 1950s, we're at the bottom half of the G7. And going to 2010s, we've actually picked up a little bit, and we're right smack in the middle. Right now, in 2023, I think was the last year that we have figure, we're actually not doing that bad. We are just behind US and Germany, so we've bumped up the place. But certainly, in terms of getting sustained economic growth, you need sustained productivity growth as well. And sustainable jobs and the clean energy transition is one of the places that we think will fuel that productivity growth. Next slide, please. Thanks, Olivia. There's also the political argument that I think is very important when we look at a democracy of Canada as well. And the simple thing is that people who are going to lose their jobs will not vote for environmental politics. I want to just show one graph. If Olivia, you can do the next slide, which shows, I think this is the latest poll I've seen from March of 2024. And it asks Canadians, what do you think are the top issues that you care about? And environment is not in the top 3. It's not even in the top 5. It's kind of down there. If you see that the top issues tend to be the economic issues. They are about unemployment and jobs. They're about taxes. People think that taxes are way too high. And they're about poverty and social inequality. And these all have folks who say that it's more important for Canada, more than 30%. You can probably find climate change smack in the middle. That's the one with 15%. And what you will see with the trend is that when the economy is doing very well, as we did back before COVID hit, so in, say, the 2017 to 2019 period, environment became more and more on top of people's lists. And at the peak, it had maybe 25, 28%. But certainly when economic downturn come over, it becomes harder for people to care about the long-term sustainability of our growth, which is very important, but people look more and more into short-term prosperity and how they could pay off their mortgage. And so sustainable jobs is really about political support for the green transition as well, because we need to show people that the environmental transition not only has a long-term impact for their future and their kids' future, but also for their immediate future as well in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, then they can get a higher paycheck by buying into the environmental transition. Next slide, please. I have 2 more, and I'll go through them very quickly because I think these are very important issues as well. So there's also the sociological argument about closing the gap on inequality. I think there are many ways that we can go about with the clean transition. We could, for example, import all of our solar panels from Germany, from China, from the US, and that would be a very cheap way for us to do that. But then we're spending a lot of money, and the people who are importers of these equipments are going to be very rich, whereas the vast majority of Canadians are not going to be very much. Or we can produce it here in Canada, and make sure we have the manufacturing capability, and we make sure that the benefits of the environmental transition is distributed across different population sets, and we have inequality mitigated. And then the last thing that I'll talk about, Olivia, is the moral argument. And I think what people sometimes forget a little bit is that the sustainable development is ultimately about dignity. It's about the dignity of people to make their own choices, but also the dignity for them to live in a world that is good for their children. It's a very great place to live. And jobs are an important aspect of dignity. Instead of saying that the government should lead things, we need to ask Canadians to participate in this sustainable development. Next slide, please. And I think I have Peter now on the show. Thank you, Peter. I want to talk very quickly about sustainable jobs and just transition. How many of you have heard the term sustainable jobs before? Raise your hand. Okay, very great. We have a lot of people. Yes, thank you very much. And how many of you have heard the term just transition before? Okay, less people. That's surprising. So the United Nations like to use the term just transition. And if you go to the global context, if you look at what UNFCCC is saying and the ILO are saying, they're all saying things about the just transition. Sustainable jobs and just transition are exactly the same thing. It's the same concept. But why is it that in Canada, I think we're quite unique in the world that we use the term sustainable jobs? Well, the reason is because I was talking to pollsters at PMO, and they were going out to places to do polling and asking them about what do they think about the word just transition? People don't like it, especially in interior BC, in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And the reason is because people feel like you are assigning a moral argument to their jobs. So if you're an oil and gas worker, for example, in Alberta, and people tell you that, well, we need to make the change because this is a just transition. What you're hearing is that Ottawa is telling you that there's a just transition and there's an unjust transition, and you are doing something that's unjust, and we're going to make you just. And people really react very strongly against it. They also feel like just transition is about transition. It's about losing jobs. And people react a lot better to sustainable jobs. And the reason is because they think about job creation. They think about jobs that will stick here for the long term. And these are things that really resonate with people. And a rose by any other name is just as sweet. What we are trying to emphasize with sustainable jobs is that these are permanent jobs that we're creating. And we're not getting people out of what we think are terrible jobs. We're just saying that these are the transitions that we need to build a better economy for tomorrow. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges for sustainable jobs transition? Next slide. I think I'm running out of time, so maybe I'll just delve on this point a little bit more, and then I'll skip through some of the other slides, and maybe if folks have questions, then we can have a discussion as well. I brought some little gifts. So these are binders with the House of Commons logo labeled on them. They're actually quite nice. And you can put stuff inside, and they're quite a collectible item. We have just a few in our office, and I brought two today. So I have two questions, and I'll give a binder to anyone that might know the answer. So, and you can shoot off a little bit because it's a multiple choice answer as well. So raise your hand if you want to guess, what is the average salary in Canada? And we're talking about full-time job. So you're working 35 hours a week. You're not allowed to Google it, by the way. And you're working full-time year, and that's after taxes. So what you get in your pocket. If you have to guess, what is the average salary in Canada as of this year? Yes, Eddie. That's very good. Okay. Do you want to come up and get a House of Commons binder? Come up. Can everyone give a round of applause to Eddie? That's very good. Thank you, Eddie. Now, the next question is, what is the average salary of worker in the oil and gas sector in Canada? And it's not one of the answers there. So you can guess anything you like, but go ahead.
Any? Okay. So like closest answer.
Closest answer, yeah.
40.
Not quite, but I'll go around, and if you're the closest, then we'll give that to you. Anyone else wants to venture a guess? Yes? 80,000? Okay, that's a good guess. Anyone? 70K? Okay. Maybe I'll take two more answers. Anyone else wants to guess? Yeah, go ahead.
25K?
25K? Okay. For full-time worker, though? Okay. Not quite. Go ahead. Did you want to guess? Or 你也可以说中文，然后我们 average, yeah.
After tax, right?
After tax, yeah, for full-time worker. 30,000? Okay. Those are quite low. Who said 80,000? Yeah, okay. So if you go down, so as of 2019 is $124,000. So please come up and everyone give him a round of applause here. Thank you. So what does that tell us? It tells us the average salary of someone who's working in the energy sector in Canada is almost twice as much as the average worker. And there are many different reasons. So one is because the oil and gas sector is very labor intensive. So if you think about them in the oil field, it's a lot of work, right? And so if you think about something that's very labor intensive in Canada, labor is very expensive here. And we pay a lot of money for that. But also because oil and gas companies could pay that much. They are sometimes in smaller locations where there's not a lot of workforce over there, and they have to attract people to come in, and that's why the salary is very high. But why is that important for the sustainable jobs transition? It is because when we try to tell the oil and gas workers and the people that we're trying to transition out that you're earning $120,000 right now, and we're going to transition you into a job that pays $60,000 for you to screw on screws onto a wind turbine, they're not really happy. And I was in Leduc, Alberta, which is an oil town just near Edmonton, talking to some of the oil workers there. And what they said to me was, people, when they think about oil and gas workers in Alberta and Saskatchewan, they think that we don't care about climate change and that we are just climate change deniers and rednecks and like kind of what you think about when you think about Americans in Texas or Republicans and Trump supporters. And they say, well, that's not really the case. I have a high school diploma and I can't really do anything else. And I've been working in the oil and gas sector for 20 years because 20 years ago, this was a good paying job. And I recognize that for my 3 children, working in the oil and gas sector is probably not very good. And I want them to have a better future. But for me, my choice is between giving them a better future 30 years from now when climate change is very, very bad. And it's really bad right now, of course. Or if I transition tomorrow, then I don't know if I can pay for a lot of what they're doing right now. And there's a lot of economic anxiety. And I feel like when the federal government is going in, we are very mindful of these kind of economic anxiety. And we want to avoid telling people that this is the right thing to do. And so you should take a 50% pay cut. We're trying to think of ways to do that. So I'm going to skip a bunch of slides because I've definitely gone more. So can you go to the last slide? Go up, please. Go up. Perfect. I'll talk about this and then maybe one more slide after that, and I'll finish. So what is the government of Canada doing right now? So we have a $95 million sustainable jobs transition plan in terms of jobs retraining. And we're focused on 4 sectors right now. And these are the sectors where we believe there's going to be good paying job. We're still not going to be able to pay $120,000 to people because that is way above the average. But we believe that these are the jobs where we will have sustained productivity growth. It will bring value to Canadian taxpayers. And we think that people are going to be able to earn a higher paycheck from here than certainly average jobs. So what are the 4 areas? The first is forest and wildfire management. And these are really important, especially for BC, but also Alberta and across the country right now. We want to work with First Nations to make sure that we have people who are going in and retrieving waste wood and making sure that we are protecting our forest environment. Low carbon energy and carbon management. And these are things in BC, particularly important are hydrogen and the accounts for about 20% of the CO2 emissions in Canada. And there's a lot of opportunity for us to abate these kind of emissions through passive house, but also through heat pumps and all sorts of renovations. And that's a place that we have identified a lot of good paying green jobs as well. And the last thing is EV vehicles in terms of building them here in Canada, maintenance and infrastructure. And as you see, there is a global scramble to build EV vehicles. Canada announced earlier this year a major auto plant, Stellantis, in Ontario, and that's going to be the largest EV battery plant in North America. And we're going to supply a lot of the EV batteries over to the US, which is the largest market for that, along with China right now. And these are places that we have a lot of growth. I'm going to get you to go slip like 3 slides. Okay, how can you do to help? And I'll finish with this slide. I think there's 3 things that you can do if you're hoping to help with the sustainable transition. The first is that we need more innovators and entrepreneurs. Sustainable jobs is ultimately about jobs, and we need job creation. And certainly, a lot of you are in high school, and I was talking to some of the folks, and it feels like you guys are all very innovative and have done really interesting things in high school already. Canada needs you. And Canada needs more people to create entrepreneurial spirit and make sure that we have companies here that could pay good green jobs for our workers. The second is the difference between sustainable jobs and just transition. We talked very briefly about how it's important to talk about sustainable jobs because we're avoiding a moral argument in terms of telling other people that if you're in the oil and gas sector, then you're evil and you're wrong and we need to transition you out. We want to avoid that. And so a lot of people are still not clear about the difference between the two. And so what I would like to get your help on is if you ever go out and you hear someone talk about just transition, you can tell them, well, that's great, but actually we want to talk about sustainable jobs and these are the reasons why. And the last place is that when we think about climate change, a lot of times we think about the urgency of it. And certainly I'm 100% on board. Like we need to change tomorrow if we can, but we can't because a lot of people's jobs and livelihoods are dependent on it. And so when we come from a place of compassion and avoid moral judgment, that's certainly a good place to start when we have these kind of climate discussions. And with that, thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary, for your presentation.